Welcome back to church. Man, we're so excited to be here today. And we got a phenomenal topic we're going to talk about. I mean, I imagine that this podcast is going to be phenomenal. Like I just feel like it's going to be great. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, imagination. And we're going to dig off into this topic. I think it's something that's relevant that you will enjoy us kind of dissecting a little bit. Jason, how do you feel about imagination?
So imagination is super important for what I do, for how I live my life, for the ways that my family moves and grooves. I think we use our imagination a lot and kind of forecast, kind of see where we're headed. One thing I think is really interesting and what I'm excited to dive into is I think you and I have a totally different definition for imagination than what the world brings to it. So in preparation for the episode, and I gotta admit, I don't think I've ever done this before. I've never just Googled the word and to see what's going on. Imagination is kind of ethereal. So I wanted to Google it and just see see what the world has to say about it. And the definition that I found was imagination is a production of sensations, feelings, and thoughts informing oneself. So I agree with the beginning that I think there are sensations, feelings, and thoughts that are informing us. But saying oneself, to me, that brings into question, or I might question myself, the source of these production of sensations, feelings, and thoughts. So to say that we just come up with it, or you might say like our brain comes up with these things, could be true, but that's like saying electricity comes from my wall socket. Well, like I know that it comes from a much larger power station, right? Yeah. The source is sending electricity everywhere. I think in the same way, God uses our memories or dreams that he gives us or ideas. And I think God is the source of imagination. I think he's sending it out. And I think that maybe in the world, they feel like when they plug it in, well, obviously electricity comes from the wall socket. Obviously imagination and ideas and sensations all come from, ourselves. Because I think societally speaking, I think we're selfish. I think we talked about that a little bit in a few episodes ago where it's just, we like to think inwardly and hope that's where everything comes from. But in thinking about imagination, the first thing I wanted to call into question, see how you feel about it, was the source. Like, I think the source is God, but I also think God utilizes our memories. He utilizes dreams that he gives us, that he puts in us from birth, that kind of those skills or the propensities that we have. I think he pours into our imagination along a timeline of our lives to be able to utilize those things and gives us dreams, gives us goals, things like that. But the source, I definitely do not think it's myself, mostly because the breadth and the size and the dynamism, if you will, like just the scale of my imagination, inherently, I couldn't have thought of it myself. And so I never want to give anything about me too much credit. So to say my brain came up with these things feels like an impossibility. And I think we see the same thing in the creativity of others in the world. So the ideas that people have, like the invention of X technology, the internet, the iPhone, trains, right? The horse-drawn carriage, the wheel, fire, as far back as you want to go. Like imagination may have been required unless it was just a miraculous happenstance or like lightning struck the ground. But even a caveman, I feel like at some point would have had to imagine striking rocks together. And maybe this is my imagination, but like imagining a caveman striking rocks together and you see a spark and they think, well, I have a spark of something. Let me just keep going and see what could come out of this. I feel like God's the source of that. Like giving us an understanding that there's more that we don't yet have or understand. That has to come from somewhere. And I don't think our brain is just manifesting that. So the source of imagination that the world gives us, ourselves, I might just call that into question. What do you think?
So I've kind of unpacked imagination in kind of three separate kind of things that combine to make imagination. And what you're talking about is my number 3 point. And it's the source of where does it come from? Where does it originate from? Like we're on the same page with that. Like the world will tell you that your imagination is all about your thoughts, your dreams, whatever. I think that that's inspired by God, kind of like how the Bible was written. You know, like the Bible was written by man, like, you know, but God wrote it. You know, it was inspired by God, and God inspired men to write the Bible. I think the people who were writing the Bible, I don't think they understood on what scale that they were doing this. You know, it's got multiple authors, and I don't think they were writing it like, 2,000 years from now, people still gonna be reading what I'm writing. You know, Paul wasn't like, hey, I'm the greatest author to ever live. He was just inspired by God to do it, you know, like something that he had to do. And so I believe our imagination is sourced, that it's a combination of God working through us. And I don't think that all of our imagination, like some things, sometimes I think we can imagine things that kind of are just from us. I'm talking about those God things, those things that connect with our souls. I know we can kind of separate the things that we imagine and be like, that wasn't good. That was kind of my flesh. That was kind of like that wasn't a good imagination, right? But I think those things that come to us, right, that God like funnels through us, and he uses our experiences, our pain, our happiness, the things that have happened to us, and he uses those things for us to kind of see a glimpse into what we were created for. I think our imagination kind of drives, it kind of helps us hone in what we are created to do. And so for me, the source, right, it's kind of like God whispering in your ear. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Anybody who's out there, if you ever question, like, what am I good at? What am I supposed to do with my life? Like, tap into your imagination. Like, because your imagination will give you clues into who you are. Like, it just comes to you. You're like, what? Like, if you've ever been somewhere in an environment where you belong, you can imagine yourself in that position. If you've ever I'm a speaker. And I love preaching. I love speakers. And so whenever I am in the environment of speaking, you know, since I was a kid, I've always imagined myself at the podium, at the mic. It's something that's just, it connects with me. And so, Jason, I think you talked about before you became a professor, that there was an environment that you were in. I think you went to present something, and it kind of, maybe your imagination clicked in there, and it kind of gave you a clue to one of the things you're supposed to do. I know that you have a passion for youth, and God has spoke to you through imagination, kind of showing your path of how you would minister to youth. And so I believe that that's kind of our imagination is something that God, like, he funnels through us. So it's kind of like something that we are a willing participant in, right? We have to like it's God doing it in combination with us. Like, we partner with God, and this kind of future kind of like, this is possible. You know, it's kind of like God saying, hey, this is possible. If I put it in your mind, it's possible. And totally separate from all those sinful, evil, lustful things that we could imagine, right? We're talking about productive, God things that are happening in our life. And if you're looking for direction in your life, I push you to be like, hey, God will always guide you. And this is the thing that I love. Some of our desires, we desire them, and we don't even know why we're connected to certain things. Like, me and Jason both love sneakers. What does that have to do with, with church or bringing people to Jesus? But it has a lot to do with connecting with people and connecting with people builds relationship, and relationship introduces them to Jesus through you. And so they like, we talk and deal with youth. We have a bunch of kids. And when you like sneakers, that's something that unites young, old, that's something across, age bands that helps you be relatable. Like, hey, you got 11s on, or you got ones. And so people are like, whoa, wait a minute. And like, what, you love God and you love sneakers? Like, what's up with this? And so I think that's kind of how imagination kind of flows. So that's my point 3. And I like the third point's like the strongest, that our imagination kind of flows through God.
Yeah. So, that's really interesting. So source was my first one. I find that's so weird. Like, I wonder where this, now I'm curious where this will go. So, you made a great point that I think I'd be remiss if I didn't hit on. Is I was just thinking of the positive sources, but I do think like our flesh, and we believe in a fallen world where sin is a part of it. And if we let ourselves, we can become victim to that thing. We can allow ourselves to get beat up by our imagination. We can become jealous of other people. We can be, lustful for the opposite sex. And I just think there's so many ways that our flesh can make us envious and jealous of other people and mad at someone. And sometimes for things that they haven't even done.
Come on.
I think sometimes we make believe or maybe it's Satan kind of putting that in our brain, right? It's just knocking on our brain and saying like, are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure that's a loyal friend? Are you sure? So in your imagination, you have a lot of exclamation points, like good ideas. And I think we have a lot of question marks too. And I think sometimes those question marks are healthy. And so I think it's worth analyzing all those things. Like if you're questioning someone's behavior, if you are questioning the source, like we talked about, of the imagination that's coming in, right? I think that's healthy. And so that's what I'd want to say is don't ever approach your imagination like everything you imagine is God ordained, because we're in a fallen world.
We are.
I guess I was hearkening back to like our episode about creativity, where like anything that you can imagine you can do through God who strengthens you.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, you can really let your flesh
come on.
And specifically, I think sometimes we say flesh, but like sometimes Satan is on the attack too.
Yeah.
Like I think both can be true. Some people attribute all of sin to Satan's attack, and some people attribute it all to flesh because they're both fallen and people do interchange. I think both are true. I think we can mature and grow and improve. And I also think Satan has access to the things that we allow him to have access to.
Oh, that's good.
And so in your imagination, you should also protect it. Because the source is so precious, don't let the enemy attack you in that way. So that's all I would say is like, you made a great point. It can come from two different places.
Yeah.
And so I am fascinated that source is your third one. So
it's funny because I know you're about to go into your second one. Yeah. But this is such a great highway. This is so what you just talked about, right? It hits on my first one, right? So my first point is mental picture, right?
Okay.
So our imagination is created about our mental picture, right? Because after all, it is your imagination, right? Sourced from God, but the mental picture kind of determines like the input to that imagination. And so what I mean about that is what does your mental picture look like? And I believe there's ingredients that go into that mental picture that determines what your imagination is focused on. And so if you're following Christ and you want a closer relationship with God, that means your imagination would align with God. If if you begin your day in prayer and focusing on God, and that your imagination will follow suit, like both when you're asleep, when you're not focused. I also believe your imagination is also fed by what you're feeding into it. So if you consume 16 hours of YouTube a day, your imagination would also be focused on whatever you're consuming, right?
Even if it's watching church.
Even if it's
Don't do
watching
that.
church, and that's a good thing, right?
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Not 16 hours.
No.
Right?
I mean, no, I was going to say, like, there's a healthy level of everything. You're right.
Yeah.
In building your mental framework, there is a level of input that Jesus should have and the Bible should have in your life that's way up here, and everything else in healthy measure. Let's say it like that.
Balance, right? And so it's also like what you're inputting into your life. You know, if you pay 12 hours of video games a day, maybe some people are professional gamers, right? But that's also going to have an effect on your imagination. We spend a majority of our day at work. And so what you do for a living also plays into pieces of your imagination, right? And so I believe your mental picture, right, kind of forms like, where is your mind really focused on? Right? Are your thoughts on God? Are your thoughts on things that are good? Or your thoughts on the economy and the election and all other kind of things that are happening, right? Or taxes, or arguments, or is something that you haven't forgiven somebody for, depression. Like all these things will feed into your mental picture, which I believe creates your imagination. And sometimes I believe we can block God out of our imagination because we're focused on everything but him. And so you won't really get to see the picture he has for you because you've kind of like locked him out. You've locked the true source out, and you're like just operating off of what. And I believe that's where the enemy, you're vulnerable, and he'll come in and he'll take those. And that's kind of what you were like talking about. Like not everything we imagine comes from God. Not everything we imagine is good. Not everything we imagine is going to happen. Right. But getting that true imaginary mental picture of where God wants you to go, you gotta have those lines cleared up. And so, just be aware of how your mental picture looks. What am I thinking about? When I'm not thinking, what am I inputting into my life? And because it will produce things in your life. So
I thought of something interesting too as you were talking, was in my life personally, and I'm curious if any of the listeners feel the same, if you feel the same. As I think through my inputs and building my mental picture, the things I think are expanding my imagination sometimes were actually limitations. Right. So there was a lot of times in the backyard practicing my jump shot where I imagined myself as an NBA player.
Okay. And
in an interesting way, barring any other things that kept me out of that lifestyle, right? Like skill level, or I know the immediate, like, well, yeah, you're just saying that you could immediately be an NBA player. That's not what I'm saying. Anything else that kept me out aside, I don't think that lifestyle was for me because traveling 9, 10, 12 months a year, not having a family, on the back end, like I am, and this is crazy, like a 17-year-old me would be ashamed of what I'm saying out loud.
Yeah.
I don't think I would trade my life for the life of an NBA player, given the pros and cons and the rewards and the costs. Like the cost was too high for me, as it turns out. And not that people weren't banging down my door to give me the opportunity, but that I wonder if that limited my imagination of the ways God was really going to use my life. Because I never, when I was in high school, even early career, I didn't imagine myself as a professor. I didn't spend any time thinking about it. I didn't imagine myself in a lot of the different roles that I play now. I never imagined I would ever have 8 kids. In fact, I'm pretty sure that in my immaturity, I probably made fun of families that look like the Partridge Family or the Brady Bunch, or like, had the giant buses and those kind of things. And like, here I am. And I'm so honored by it, proud of it. I was kind of avoiding trying to say proud of it. Like, it's not like my pride lies in the size of my family, but I'm so proud of our family.
Yeah.
And just the ways God is able to use us and bless other people, and the ways we bless each other, the miracle that is my children. And not to tell too much of a story, but because of my wife's autoimmune disease, she has Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And so what that means is it should have been very difficult for us to maintain pregnancies. And so we were, in theory, medically speaking, we were supposed to have more miscarriages. Or they would have said, statistically speaking, with each passing child that wasn't a miscarriage is an even greater miracle. So we adopted one, which we've talked about. So then 7 pregnancies, we never had a miscarriage. Like the miracle of that is staggering to my wife and I. Statistically speaking, most people don't shoot 100%.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and especially in that physical condition that she's in, that she can't avoid. It got activated with her first pregnancy. And now she's taking thyroid medicine every day, those kind of things. Things should have gotten more challenging when in fact her body responded better during pregnancies. So anyway, that's a situation I couldn't have imagined. Is all of these things that have happened and the ways that I would handle them, or the ways that we could dream up a life. I wouldn't have dreamed up the life I had. I didn't have the imagination for that. And I wonder if that's because I spent so much time focusing on different goals, focusing on different outcomes, and not, God, what do you have for me?
Yeah.
Like, what do I need to be preparing for? And not to say that he hasn't blessed me regardless of that, like my wanderings. And I think God can do anything in your life. Yeah. I don't think we can destroy God's ability to bless us the minute that we turn to him. I think that God's ready. Like, he's ready to bless your life. And so I didn't mean for it to, but I guess that question led to, like, I'm asking you, Warren, do you ever feel like your imagination has limited what God did? And like, my second thought that I wrote down, I put sources and then I put goals. Like, what goals is your imagination helping you achieve? Right. And I think we're coming at it from the same spot, even though sources were at different ends of our list. It's kind of the same idea, but for goals, I think I limited the potential of my imagination sometimes because I wanted to fit into a box that felt comfortable or that I liked. And so then maybe the goals of my imagination, now that I am a little more mature, thankfully, and can kind of open up my mind to whatever God would put in my imagination, my goals can also expand.
Wow.
Like, I'm not limiting God with my own imagination. So do you ever felt like you've limited God's ability to feed your imagination? I guess. That's my question to you.
I think I absolutely have done that. And I'll give
Thank goodness, because if you had said no, I'd be.
I think I absolutely.
If you had said no, I'd be like, well.
I absolutely have. I think the world conditions us for failure. It conditions us for a limited view of what could happen, right? And practically, I was supposed to be in the NFL. I'm built like an NFL player. I got the skills. It didn't happen, right? It just, that was my life goal, right? And I had this grandiose, idea of it until the 9th grade. I took a hit. I was like, I could not get paid to do this for the rest of time. It just didn't, it was a life-changing thing. But like, I think even when we started Lowercase Church, right? Yeah. Like, my imagination was, God, if 10 people watch and 10 people can be helped, wow, I was like, we get to do this. And what has happened through that, I couldn't imagine. Like, where we are today.
Agreed. Yeah.
With the people who watch, the people who subscribe, who take time out of their day to listen to us talk about God. And it's mind blowing, right? Because I'm so glad that my imagination wasn't the reality of what would happen, right? Because I think sometimes we can only see so far, right? Yeah. And I believe that can kind of prevent us from moving forward or even attempting something, right?
I totally
think about it. Like, tell somebody, what's your expectation? Oh, my expectations, 50 people, right? And most people are like, don't waste your time, and so I do believe our imagination can stop us from achieving God's best for our life, because he ultimately is in control of everything. And sometimes we can't see success. We can't see what he's doing because not everything works. And sometimes we think that that applies to everything we try. Right.
Yeah.
But we just have to keep leaning into those things that we are called to do. And I believe even in my own life, there's been things that I've walked away and not done that who knows? I just couldn't imagine.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
There's things that, I wanted to do and I felt like they were for me to do and it didn't line up or was just too hard. But here's the thing about life. I've walked away from things that God brought back to me. And so
cool.
Here's a public service announcement. Like, if you can relate to that, like if there is a lost dream or something that you thought that you were supposed to do, that happened in your life, that you had an opportunity to do, or you missed the opportunity, when it shows back up, just do it. Just when that opportunity shows up in your life again, don't second guess it. Just do it. Maybe you couldn't imagine it then. This is a different time. And so I encourage you to lean into those things that come back around.
Yeah.
Right? Those things, those dreams, those goals, those ambitions. Maybe somebody was going for a career and they were like, I'm too old, or that just passed. When it shows up again in your life, open the door, right? Go after it, expand what you can actually see in your imagination. Don't be limited by your own experience of failures and your experience of, that's crazy thinking. Some of that crazy thinking is exactly what God wants to do in your life, because it's not about your life. It's about the lives of the people who will be affected by it, and I kind of bring it all back to, if two friends didn't grab 2 microphones and 2 cameras, then, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation with the amazing people who get to share this time with us. And so, just because you can't see it doesn't mean that God can't do it.
Yeah. And I think even for going further into that, our imagination of what this was, we thought about different ideas. And so we just landed on one and started going. Kind of like, it wasn't like a 10-step plan. It wasn't that if we can't imagine our way to number 5, then we're not going to go.
Yeah.
And we're fluid about it. Like tomorrow, something could hit us and change and be different, and different sources, different goals with imagination, different moments of inspiration. I think it helps to just stay open to whatever God's doing and like be prayerful about those things. I think you hit on it too, is like oftentimes our imagination is one thing, and then what God does is different and better. That's the most important part.
So much better than you imagined,
it's different
right?
And better. Yeah.
So much
it is.
better.
I think that, like you had mentioned before, if you had asked us, what would we like the success level to be, then, and I think this is true of a lot of things. If you asked someone about what the success level they would seek is in certain ministries and certain goals in their life, they would underestimate what God can do.
Come on.
Because I don't know if we think we're asking too much. I don't know if we think, well, I might not be the person, so I don't want to dream because then I might be disappointed.
Come on.
Right? And I don't think God calls us to disappointment. He calls us to trust.
Let's go, Jason.
Right? And so I think it's about trust.
Yeah.
Like God's saying, I'm giving you the imagination. Can you trust I can make it happen?
Come on.
So I believe in a God that can move mountains. But do I actually believe that if I have the faith of a mustard seed, it'll move a mountain? Do I like actually believe it? Or am I thinking like, well, that's a metaphor? Like immediately my brain, that thing where it's coming from oneself, imagination, it's immediately fighting me. And so maybe that's how I can point back to the beginning where I call into question that it's coming from myself, because I would immediately fight back against what I know Jesus has said is true.
Come on.
And so I would much rather let my imagination run wild and be in alignment with what God would do or what Jesus said in the Bible than what I think is possible, because I am so limited in what I think is possible.
Yeah.
In fact,
So,
I think this is true for everybody. Conceptualizing eternity is nearly impossible.
it is.
And I saw this account the other day, and I believe it's called the AI Bible. Shout out to whoever runs that Instagram. But it's an interesting depiction of, it always starts with, here's what people think this story from the Bible looked like. And then they run it through AI and put in what the Bible prompt was, or they kind of build out what the truth is.
Mhm.
And it, most of the time, is far more unbelievable and magnificent, you know? Or they'll show like old paintings of a moment in the Bible, and then they'll show AI putting something together. Like the most interesting one I saw actually was a depiction of, this is what people think Satan looks like. And it's this, you know, red, almost bull-like character with horns and wings. And it's always like the pitched fork in hand, and the spaded tail, you know, with the little point and those kind of things, like almost cartoony. And then it said how the Bible describes it, or what Lucifer actually looks like. And it's an angel. Like, it's this guy that is radiating like armor of God and these things. And like, oh yeah, Lucifer was an angel. Like, the devil was part of God's army. And he rebelled. But the whole point of that is, our imagination is so different than the reality of what's going on. And whether your imagination is painted by media, pop culture, history, your interests, all those things, the best possible scenario might be to wipe it clean and be like, let's start from the source, man. What does God say about this thing? And how can I find out the truth?
Dude, that's so good.
The truth might be the best source, the best goal of imagination.
Come on.
Is like the actual truth, not the truth I think is possible. And so anyway, this is me stepping back, allowing you the platform, Warren. That's just like what I was thinking about, is truth is the source of imagination.
Dude, you hit on something so powerful. You hit on something so powerful. And the question I pose is, have you ever delayed something that you knew you were supposed to do? Maybe it was an apology. Maybe it was a paper you had to write. Maybe it was going back to school or starting a business, something that you knew you were supposed to do or you had to do. You just delayed it, you know, or maybe it was something that it was hurtful that you had to address, or a problem that you knew you had to solve and you just delayed it. You kept putting it off. And sometimes I believe our imagination, we imagine how things are going to go. Say it's a tough conversation you need to have, right? And you just keep delaying it because you imagine this conversation just going so bad, it going so terrible. I can tell you the times in my life where I found delayed stuff because I just didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right. Like here's an example, like not going to the doctor on a bi-yearly or yearly basis, right? Because you just like, I don't want to know how my blood work's doing.
I don't want bad news.
You know, I just wanted to, or the dentist, right? Like most people are like, I don't want to deal. Like because I imagine this is not going to go good. Right. I've done that before in my life. And then when I show up to these things, either by I have to, something happened, I got sick or whatever, I show up and it goes completely different than what I imagined. And I'm like, why did I delay that? That wasn't that bad. That wasn't that, you know, that haunted me for like, you know, that kind of messed with me for a long time because I avoided doing something I was supposed to do because I imagined it being more hurtful or more painful. And I spent a lot of my time with that, like on the background of my life, like worrying me, like, oh, I got this thing hanging out there, right? I know people who don't check their credit report because they don't want to know. And I'm, you know, it's like, I just, you know, just things like that we imagine are going to go so bad, right? Here's the biggest piece. I believe there are people today who are avoiding surrendering to Jesus because they imagine that life surrendered to God is full of rules. It's full of no fun. And it's not the life that they want. Right. And don't get me wrong. When you surrender to Jesus, there's some sinful things that you got to cut out. But let me tell you, it's not what you've imagined. It is not what you imagined. It is the most amazing thing. You don't even start living. And take this from me, this is my point of view, but you don't even start living until you connect your life to Jesus. He is the source of all things. Like peace that surpasses all understanding. Like it ain't even fair. Like people say, oh, Christians live a different life. A believer who believes in Jesus, it ain't even fair. It's not fair how we move through life. And you be like, how are you unfazed? Because I know the creator of the universe.
Right.
I speak to him. I have a relationship with him. I don't deserve it, right? But he loves me that much. But the thing is, if you're delaying that and you're listening to this because you imagine that your life will be, you would lose happiness and joy. No, the Bible tells us the person who tries to keep his life, they'll lose it. But the one who gives up his life, surrender to God, you will gain it. And so I had to put that out there because Jason, you kind of hinted to that. Like that is I know there's a lot of people like, I'm one of those people like, man, I imagine this is not going to go good. Let me just kind of just delay it and delay it. I'm like, don't delay any longer. If you not completely surrendered your life to God, man, you're missing out. You're missing out on the best life you can ever have. And don't let your imagination, you mentioned this, don't let your imagination like stop you from having the best experience on this earth what you were created for. I think that's something that we can't just bypass. We have to say that today because I know people are struggling with that. No matter what it is, imagine yourself giving it to God, and trust me, it's gonna be better than you ever imagined.
Yeah, I think the truth of your relationship with Jesus, my relationship with Jesus, is grace for the past, freedom in the present, and hope for the future.
Come on now.
Like that's it. So grace, freedom, and hope. And that is more than we could ask, think, or imagine. I just had to throw that in there at some point. But God will bring more than you think.
Come on.
And the hope for the future can be as big as God puts the burden on your heart. And I think the grace is the hard part. I think sometimes that's where you talked about the mental picture before, like the sourcing of our imagination sometimes is our own limitations. And so that's the challenge, is we have to get beyond that to see the goals, right? And to see the outcomes that could be possible. Because I think imagination is like a waking dream. Sometimes like you have this thing and it's not quite manifested. And the beauty of that to me, I think, is the challenge for some other people. And maybe I'm challenged by this sometimes too. I don't mean to act like I'm perfect and I got it all together, but God in the midst of the thing makes it awesome.
Come on.
Even when I don't know the outcome of something that I'm heading into, God in the midst of it, at the center of it, throughout all of the choices that I make in it or the imaginations I have about it, makes it a worthwhile pursuit.
Yeah.
It makes it as Christians, we say like God breathed on something. And I think that what that is like God breathed creation into existence. So if we think he created the whole universe, which I do, then who am I to limit what he can do in one building with one relationship, in one situation with one aspiration, anything that you're going through, unless it's larger than the entire universe. And even then, God still got it.
Yeah.
Like the universe, the size of the universe, which supposedly is ever expanding. I do not know enough about science to know if that's true or not. I've just heard that. But let's say the universe is ever expanding. God is still bigger by so many measures we can't even understand. And so the cool part is we get to have a relationship with that entity that created everything.
Come on.
So it's really cool. And it's a personal relationship. And I think that informs my approach to imagination. So to kind of bury the lead, that was my third one. I was thinking about source. So where does it come from? What are the goals of it? Like how should you approach the goals? And then what is your approach to it after that?
Come on.
So if you know the sourcing and the goals, how do you go about it?
Yeah.
And I think much like we do with many of our episodes, the last word on it is seek Jesus.
Yeah.
Seek what he says, seek a relationship with God, and he will help you in how you approach
Come on.
the things you can't imagine. Because I couldn't have told you the people God would bring into my life, the relationships that would be important, and the ways in which they would shape me.
Mm-hmm.
But they have. And so, again, if you had asked me, imagine your future, well, it's hard for me to imagine another person like Warren. God has made you dynamic and interesting to talk to and approachable and all these things that led to the consideration of a podcast being a good platform for what we do. But I would have had to imagine 40 years of experiences and basically put you together to make this a viable imagination for me. Because you have to imagine the person, you have to imagine the ways that people move and shake and all the things. And like, I think there's a city called Houston, Texas. And what's going to happen? Like imagine if I was like trying to build someone's life.
Yeah.
It would be laughable. Like I think I would laugh at somebody. It's like, all right, build my perfect wife, and I've said this before, and I really do mean this. I could not have built a better wife
than
Delia, my wife.
Go. Shout out.
Yeah, shout out. There's things, or like the children God's gonna bring into your life. The joke here is like, there's moments where I'm like, I wish I could like pick and choose personality traits, but like in all seriousness, the joy that I have in watching them grow, the joy that I have in being married to my wife, the joy that I have in building friendships with you, Warren, and with other people, is that I couldn't have put it together. I have to take an approach to imagination where I have to trust what God is doing, not in my life only, but in other people's lives. And when they come in, stay open to it.
Come on.
Like that's the approach to imagination to me, is stay open to it. Be ready for what God is going to do all the time.
Come on.
You don't know if you don't know if the next person who walks in the front door at church or at school or at work or that you see at the fast food restaurant. The reason I thought of that is Delia happened to meet one of her best friends because they both were homeschooling and they happened to be in the same, I think, like McDonald's play place.
Okay.
Like playground area at the same time. And Delia said, God just put on her heart, go talk to her. And now we have family friends. Shout out to the Valdivia family.
Let's go.
Who they're just like bosom buddies now. Like we go to each other's birthday parties and all those things. And it was, people be like, oh, where'd you guys meet at? You met at church? No, we met at a McDonald's. And it's really just Delia's bravery and her approach to, and sometimes the approach isn't just like imagining a future. It's just not limiting what God can do.
Yeah.
Like, don't overthink it. Approach it like, God's put that on my heart. I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to imagine. Our whole episode is about imagination. Here's the dirty secret. We don't have to spend a lot of time diving into our imagination. It can be a moment. And then I think it's about living it out.
Come on.
And doing what God asked you to do when he asked you to do it.
Come on.
Right? Because you said,
you're hitting.
Have you ever missed an opportunity?
Yeah.
Have you ever dodged what God's giving you? How about that? That's a way of looking at it, is like, God put your heart on something, or he's put a burden on your heart and you ignored it.
Yeah.
Here's the scary part. I think because God is way, way smarter than we are, and way the creator of the universe, and way we are not. I think it can come once and then you miss it. Like, God's not always going to bring the exact situation back, but he'll bless the next thing. And so I'm sure there's opportunities that I've passed by or that others have passed by, and I'd have to fully understand God, and I just never will.
Yep.
So to explain this to people is to say, there could be the moment you missed that then God blessed the next thing. But wouldn't it be cool if we didn't? Like, wouldn't it be cool if you approached imagination and approached God with a heart of like, I'm just going to move when you say move.
Yeah.
And let's see what happens.
Come on. Dude, that's good.
And look, this is going to be a struggle for me the rest of my life. Like, can I move when God says move? And I don't mean a struggle like, just what are you going to do? God says move, and you're sure, like, and I think sometimes it's like having a relationship with your dad. you know his voice,
Yep.
and you recognize when he's asking you to do something.
Yeah.
Are you going to obey? Because
Good.
I have kids. I know that a dad's voice is not always obeyed. And I know that doesn't mean that I'm now done blessing your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are you going to do? That's the question of the episode is like, you have an imagination. God's putting it on you.
What are you going to do?
You know the source, right? You've got a healthy source.
Whoa.
You know that it's a good goal. How are you going to approach it?
Wow.
So,
that's funny because my middle point, right? Like, this has been such a phenomenal talk.
Yeah.
Like, this has been so good.
Yeah.
I'm like, who knew I had at the start at the end, you started at the beginning, and we meet in the middle, right? And so my middle point, right, is creative ability. And so that kind of brings everything, it kind of just brings everything in it. We got the source, right? We got the source. We talked about mental picture, right?
Yeah.
We've definitely talked about goals, and you've just called into action. Like, what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this? Right. And here's the piece.
Yeah.
Here's the piece that I really think that I really want just us to take away from this, and people who are listening. Like, we have this thing called imagination, and I believe that it's for God to remind us of our creative ability. And let me frame that for you. We, believers in Christ, believers in Jesus, right? We know that God's a creator. He's a creator.
Yeah.
And we're his children. And I honestly believe that he calls us to create for him. Create opportunities, create space, create things that just don't exist. And there's something unique about art. There's something unique about the things that come out of us, that God puts in us, that are uniquely us. Like the way you design stuff, Jason. Someone else can copy your design language, but they can never be you. The way you creatively approach people, or the things that you've got books that you've created, like those are inspired, right, by the source, but they come through you. Right. So I think we discount our creative ability, our ability to use what God has created us to do, to put it out into the world.
Yeah.
And however that looks, in whatever capacity, you just call people, like, you got this thought, like, what are you going to do with it? Right. And think about it. If the apostles didn't move forward on what God told them to do, to write the Bible, we wouldn't have it.
Right.
Right. Some of the greatest worship music or songs or art, skyscrapers, would never exist if people didn't tap into their creative ability. Right. If no one ever sat in a church and was like, hey, you ever thought about putting screens in here? Creative ability, right? Like if we only had a book of hymnals and no one else came up with worship songs, right? Like we wouldn't have taken like the experience, we wouldn't have what we have today if no one tapped into their creative ability. And so I believe these imaginations that we have, right, inspired by God, they call us into action, and they remind us, you're here to do something. You're not just here to consume oxygen and food and struggle with distractions. You're here to create something. Your imagination connects you to your creative ability. What are you here to create? What are you here to do? Because that's what God is calling you for. Like, why is it better because you're here? Why is it different? What did you contribute? Like, that is, I think, the essence of like, man, like, I see that. And you're like, okay, so don't you know that God's allowing you to see that because he wants you to create it? That's why it's different. That's why it doesn't make sense. That's why it's unique, because it's coming through you from the source, which is God. And I know this really is in your lane, Jason, because you're a creative, right? Like you teach people how to create, right? But I really believe that God calls us to create something, not out of nothing, but out of what we are, our environments, what we're in. And, you know, my call out to people today is the same thing that Jason just said. What are you going to do about it? God made you a creative being, and he's put these things in your head. I don't know if they're businesses. I don't know if it's to change the world through volunteering or whatever it is that you were called to do, whatever what you've imagined, and you've probably like, oh my goodness, that'll never happen unless I win the lottery or whatever. Let me tell you, you're connected to the greatest source that never runs out, right? You just have to move forward, and God makes ways for things to happen. And so don't be afraid of creating the thing that God has put in you, because he only put it in you. And if you don't do it, it just won't be done. Not the way that you do it. Someone else will do it, but they won't do what you were supposed to do. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, it just won't get done. If Jason doesn't draw the photo or the picture, if he doesn't create it, it's not going to get created. I can come behind him and be like, I'm going to do it, but it'll be what I was supposed to do, not what he was supposed to do. Right. And so my saying is live full, right? Die empty, right? Use up everything that God has put in your life to use, and never let anything go to waste.
Yeah. And the even more challenging part of what you said is, if the source is Jesus and you believe it, like as a believer, I'm talking to fellow Christians now. If we believe that the source is God and the inspiration for all of our imagination, and then you said, Warren, that if we don't use our creative ability, we're missing out. I might even take it a step further. And how challenging is this? If we don't use our creative ability and we believe our source is God, are we really calling into question his ability? Like if we don't live it out, because we're supposed to be the examples, right? If we don't live it out, are we calling into question whether God can do it or not?
Yeah.
And so, boy, am I guilty of this.
I like that.
I'm guilty of it though. Yeah. It's like A equals B, B equals C. So A has to equal C, right? So if God's our source and we're saying we can't do it, but we believe God is the source of not just the idea, but the accomplishment of the idea, the finishing of the idea, who am I to stand in the way of it by not doing it? And so I'm not trying to just give myself permission to do everything I think of, but if God has put a burden on your heart about something, don't limit what he can do.
Yeah.
Like you're actually showing the world, maybe you don't trust it. And so why should I? So that's what challenges me, is like, if I say I believe God can do anything, am I living it out?
Come on.
Like if I really believe, am I really showing that it is possible what I didn't think was possible? So I think you and I are doing our best to live it out. I genuinely hope I am. And if I'm not, I would challenge whoever's watching, if I'm not doing the best job I can with it, you do better. Like I want everyone listening to do better than I have ever done, trusting God with the imagination he's given them. Because that is the best approach.
Yeah.
Like, let's not bury the lead, but if you have fast forwarded to this point, you now have the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Is that God's going to give you not just the idea, he's going to give you the tools, he's going to give you the resources, the people are going to come into your life that matter, the resources. Like you said, winning the lottery, that's kind of what put that in my head, was like, if you think you need $1 million to get it done, God's either going to find you $1 million or you're going to find out you didn't need $1 million because God had a different plan.
Yeah.
So, but those are the two possible outcomes. Like if you know for sure God's like, you need to go do this, but you know practically it's $1 million, God will figure it out. And I have actually heard story time and time again. And the challenging part as humans is it's only in retrospect. You look back at what happened and you're like, well, of course this all worked out. Like, look what God did, or like, look what a miracle it is.
Yeah.
What if we could live like God's got a miracle coming ahead of time?
Come on.
And so you just move faithfully in it.
Faithfully.
Right? Would you trust him for 20 years? Would you trust him with 30 years? Would you trust him with whatever he's asking for? Realizing that it's worth it.
Yeah.
Like it actually is worth it. So, God is so cool.
So awesome.
Like, no kidding. Like the freedom and like the beauty of being a Christian, it just helps me be like, man, I'll never fully understand. And that's okay. Like the level at which God is awesome.
Yeah.
And just like the coolest and the best to be around.
It's overwhelming.
You know? Yeah.
To think how vast and how limitless the God we serve is.
And yet how focused on us.
Yeah.
Like he can spend the time with us and yet he's got everything else under control too.
Yeah.
And I think it just spins my brain, because the more I try to control, the less I seem to understand it.
True.
And the less I try to control, the more in retrospect, it's like, oh, well, God just did it.
Yeah.
Like, of course he did it. He's God.
He's God.
And so what I want to do is start every single journey of my life for the rest of my life, be like, hey, God's going to do it. Of course he's going to do it.
Yep. Of course he is.
So I'd like it to be, of course, you know? So that was good, man. Do you have any other thoughts about imagination? Any kind of like
this has been
final points for us to take away?
My encouragement.
Yeah, right?
My encouragement is to lean into those things. Like, let's go. God's going to do it. Of course he is. He's God.
Keep imagining.
Yeah. And he will do exceedingly abundantly above all you can ask or think. So that means your imagination doesn't even come close to his capability. So if he gave it to you, you can trust and know that he's going to bring it to pass. It will happen.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, you have to be a willing partner in this. You have to be a person of action. What are you going to do? You're just going to keep having that imagination? God's like, he keeps telling you, like, move. I'm talking to somebody right now that's like, I've been in the industry for so long and I want to quit, and I want to do this. I want to open this up. And you're like, this is your call to action. This is your call to say, hey, that's not just a random thought. You know, that's not just a thing that just keeps bugging you. That's something that God wants you to do. Yeah.
If you know God is saying move. That's the best advice I could ever give.
Move.
So thankful for you, man. This has been awesome. Got another one in the books. I'm gonna pray us out, and I want everybody to keep imagining.
Yeah.
You know, trust God with it. God, I just thank you so much for today's episode. I thank you for Warren. I thank you for the ideas that you give us both. I thank you for the ability to imagine a future, and then you to do even more with it than we could imagine. Just making it bigger, better. And by that, it's just more about you. Thank you so much for the ways you bless us. I pray that you would just protect our families, just keep pouring into our lives, and help us know to move when you say move.
Yeah.
In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Love you, man.
You too, man.
That was so good.
That was good, man.
This is going to be like on my heart for so long. So, I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.
Absolutely, man.